And welcome in to yet another episode of the Blitz podcast. I'm your host today, Mr. Kane Schwartz, and I'm joined by my guy, Mr. Jaden Kozak. How we doing today?
Doing pretty good. Excited to get into some trade deadline conversation. We're finally at that point in the season we can start talking about players really moving. We've seen some trades so far. Guys like Randy Gregory, Miko Hardman got dealt today. I'm blanking on some of the other ones that have happened early this year, but we've got some more that we could potentially see happen over this next week or two that I think are really interesting. Some that could be kind of likely, some that are way out there. Who knows?
Way out there.
But we'll see.
This
We'll
guy,
see.
he's already coming at me, bro. I cannot believe it. But that is the beauty of me and Jaden being on a podcast together. I can't wait to talk about the trade deadline moves that we're starting to predict. I will take a chance, and I've done a lot of this this year. I'm sorry, it's selfish, but I predicted the CMC trade last year. So nobody else has correctly predicted a trade on this podcast except me. So before you get all hasty on my takes, just remember that, okay?
Let's get
No
started,
response.
Kane. Come on.
Okay. All right, man. Okay. That made me sound like a major douchebag, but that's not who I am. I'm just here to talk about some trade deadline deals that might happen as we approach ever so closely to the NFL trade deadline. And we were talking about it a little bit before the episode. I mean, we've seen more movement with trades in general. It's been more in the offseason, but we've seen more trades in the National Football League with bigger players than ever before. So we expect this trade deadline to be pretty exciting, pretty spicy to say the least. So without further ado, let's dive into some of the guys that we think could be traded at this year's NFL trade deadline. And we start with my very own player who was drafted at number 2 overall back in 2020. And I'll let you take it away from there, man.
Yeah, I think this is a really fun one here. Chase Young going to Houston. Washington's kind of pigeonholed themselves a little bit with this contract situation. Obviously, we know they've invested very heavily into their defensive front. They've already locked up John Allen. They've already locked up Deron Payne for the future. Now they come into this offseason with the two guys on the edge, and Montez Sweat and Chase Young both as impending free agents. Chase Young is balling right now. I believe he's somewhere in the top 10 in pressures so far this season. He's playing like one of those guys that gets paid towards the top of the market at their position. Like, I would not be surprised. He's not going to reset the market, but I would not be surprised if a team paid him $30 million a year moving forward, putting him in that top portion of the contract bracket for edge rushers. And I don't think Washington could do that, especially when they have to make a decision between him and Montez Sweat. You got to remember also, there's only one franchise tag to go around. Chase Young seems like a good franchise tag player with, they invested highly in him. They saw him be good. Then he got hurt. He was hurt for a while, and now he's balling again. If he keeps this up, I feel like he would make a lot of sense to go on the franchise tag. But then if you pay Montez Sweat, it just becomes increasingly less likely that they end up paying Chase Young long term after that's done, especially if he continues to play at this level. They're probably not even going to be able to afford him. So here they're going to send him to Houston for 2 third-round picks. Now, for those that think that might be a little low, we got to remember, spent some time injured recently, where this is a very small sample size of him being this dominant player that we haven't seen in a little bit from him. Also, expiring deal. They declined his 5th-year option, so he is a free agent at the end of this year. And the compensatory picks for him when he hits this market probably going to be a 3rd-round pick. I think there's going to be some competition here for Chase Young if he actually becomes available. I initially had the Ravens in here as they need some pass rush help, but I think the Texans have a very unique opportunity here to bring him in, and I think they'd be willing to give up that extra 3rd-round pick because they know, hey, we're going to sign this guy long term, and yeah, we know that we're going to have to give up the money, but we know we're going to have Will Anderson and Chase Young on either side of each other for the next 4 years, and we're not paying Will Anderson. Like, think about their contract situations. Like, they're pillars on this roster right now. CJ Stroud, rookie deal. Nico Collins, rookie deal. Will Anderson, rookie deal. they're not paying that much. Now they do have some higher price. They did spend a little bit of money this offseason on guys like Jimmy Ward, guys like Dalton Schultz. They've got Laramie Tunsil, who's being paid at the top of the tackle market, but they can afford to make this move and go add a potentially elite pass rusher, creating one of the 2 or 3 best pass rush duos if they continue to progress with Chase Young and Will Anderson. I just think this is a smash move for Houston.
Yeah, I mean, I can't offer too much rebuttal to that. I can totally see it. I mean, I can't deny what Chase Young's been doing on the field for my yours truly, the Commanders. But I'm tired of it. Like, I kind of think it's time to move on from Chase Young. And you mentioned he's probably going to get paid at the top of the market for edge rushers. And we've already got a guy in Montez Sweat who outperformed Chase. I know Chase Young was banged up for most of the season last year. But Montez Sweat, for the most part, his time in Washington has been more successful than Chase Young's time in Washington, to say the least. And Montez Sweat is going to come at a discount because he's not playing up to the ability that we've seen him play so far this year. Go ahead.
Yeah, and you also have to remember that teams kind of hold that in the back of their mind of like, oh, this guy was the number 2 pick. Like, we have the chance to get the number 2 pick from a few years ago that is producing at what could be, like, even if he gets paid $30 million, like, when he came into the league, if you would have said and you would have, like, seen how the edge market would have progressed and you drafted him, you're like, okay, well, he's going to reset the edge market when it's time for him. So you're maybe even getting him a little bit of a discount here if you're paying him in that range, like, especially if you can get him under 30. And, like, all the physical stuff for Chase Young has been there. It's always been there. And it's just been a matter of staying healthy. It's been a matter of if his mind's in it. It seems like both of those things are there right now. And it's like, this is the guy that Washington drafted at number 2. Like, this guy that they're getting right now is a fucking animal, man. Like, he is playing at that level.
In that draft, he was probably the best overall prospect.
Yeah, I mean, like, Burrow definitely is a little difficult because quarterback, but quarterbacks get pushed up the board. But, like, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Chase Young wasn't the best non-quarterback prospect in that draft, because he absolutely was. Like, he was getting the Nick Bosa comparisons, the Joey Bosa comparisons, the Myles Garrett, like, all of those premium edge rushers from years past that got picked at the top of their draft. Chase Young was getting compared to those guys, and rightfully so. Was an absolute crazy prospect coming out of Ohio State. And like I said, he's starting to become that guy that Washington would hope they be. It's just that a really bad time because all of the investment that they've made here, this roster isn't quite as a whole where you would have wanted it to be at this point. I think when they drafted Chase Young, they were like, okay, we'll give it another year. We'll draft the quarterback next year. We'll figure the thing out. And we'll be a playoff team by the time Chase Young is ready to be paid, and we can justify
I'm only
that
shaking
payment.
my head because I was thinking that exact thing
I'm sorry.
when we drafted him. Like, that was the blueprint, and it didn't quite work out.
Yeah.
But makes sense to sell Mr. Chase Young over to Houston at the trade deadline. I could definitely see that happening as we get closer to that. And, I mean, Will Anderson and Chase Young for the foreseeable future would be scary, to say the least. On a D'Amico Ryans defense, too.
The defense is playing really well right now, by the way, too.
Yeah, for sure. So, the next big trade deadline acquisition that could be unfolding at this year's NFL trade deadline is Jerry Jeudy to the Indianapolis Colts. So you got to start with Jerry Jeudy. I mean, if you've paid any sort of attention to the trade deadline buzz or any sort of trade buzz that's been going on over the past few weeks, then you've heard about Jerry Jeudy and his possibility of heading out of Denver. Denver, they've been reported to have a potential fire sale coming at the NFL trade deadline. And they've got some pieces that could definitely be moved to other teams. And it seems like right now that Jerry Jeudy is probably the most likely to move. Definitely the most likely to move. Sutton kind of started out as the favorite, but it seems like Jerry Jeudy will be on the move at the deadline. Reportedly, the talks with the Colts have moved past just exploratory talks, and they've actually started to pick up a decent amount. So the Colts could end up with a former first-round wide receiver out of Alabama, but it's hard to make a case for Jerry Jeudy. Don't get me wrong. Like, if you've been paying attention to this podcast, paying attention to football, you saw the whole Steve Smith ordeal that happened just a few weeks ago when Steve Smith called him out on the air, and Jerry Jeudy, as Steve Smith's doing a sideline report later on in the pregame, He's kind of bobbing his head in the background and screaming on national television. And I told you before the podcast that might have turned off like 25 teams that think that he might be a head case. But he could be gotten at a discount now because of all those concerns. And you got to say that the talent is there. I mean, this guy was drafted as a first-round wide receiver out of Alabama. The talent is there. It's just a matter of if he can put it together on the field, if he can get his confidence all put together. It's a question mark. But if the Colts take a chance, it would make some sense. They got Josh Downs, who's looking like a great pick so far from this year's past draft. They've got him coming out of the slot, beat out Isaiah McKenzie for that job. So they seem like they got the slot wide receiver position down. But I think do you think it's fair enough to call Alec Pierce a bust on the outside yet? Like, I think that we're starting to lean into that territory.
I mean, he's a second-round pick. So, like, to say that he's a bust, like, this is... the expectations weren't super high for Alec Pierce. Like, I don't think...
Yeah.
Like, if they got...
As a second-round pick, though, I mean, that's decent draft capital.
He had a nice catch on Sunday. I'll say that. But there have been... I mean, this has not exactly been a situation that's been ideal for wide receivers here in Indianapolis since he got here. He had Matt Ryan... for the majority of it was kind of a disaster last Sam Ellinger, and then coming in this year, he's had a different quarterback pretty much every other game. It's been Anthony Richardson, then Gardner Minshew, then Anthony Richardson, then Gardner Minshew. So it's had a little bit of instability there. Also, they have drafted a guy like Josh Downs who's getting some targets here as well, and not to mention this is a generally run-centered team. So from a production standpoint, I get it, just on the Alec Pierce thing. But as far as Judy goes, I think adding him here definitely adds another element to this offense. This definitely also feels like a next year move. Because this year, I don't think the Colts are really pushing their chips in with Anthony Richardson done for the year. Gardner Minshew had a pretty rough outing last Sunday. So I think the confidence of okay, well, he's one of the best backups in the league or the best backup in the league or whatever might be a little bit shaky right now. But I still think adding a guy like Jerry Jeudy, who we've seen at points in time, could be a really good wide receiver. I understand he may have some off-the-field stuff, but I feel like he's been in trade rumors for forever now, and I feel like they could be getting a really good wide receiver at a discount here.
Yeah, they could be, for sure. And as I said, I'm a Pierce fan. I've got him in Dynasty, actually a couple of Dynasty leagues, so I'm a Pierce fan. But if you're looking for an outside receiver to contribute right now, because Michael Pittman's produced, Josh Downs has produced, there are wide receivers that are producing in this offense, and Alec Pierce isn't. I don't want to make this an Alec Pierce schmear campaign, but I could see the fit for Jerry Jeudy on the outside there. And we saw from Jerry Jeudy last year. People forget, he got 100 targets last year, which not a lot of wide receivers do. He got 972 yards and 6 touchdowns. So he wasn't that bad last year. And this is, mind you, with the Russell Wilson show experience that we got last year. So, and in 2021, he had Teddy Bridgewater, and his rookie year, he had Drew Lock. So he really hasn't had an opportunity to show what he can do with a good quarterback. Like you said, maybe this makes more sense after this year, because then you have Anthony Richardson, and because if you're going to Gardner Minshew, it's just much of the same story. But maybe they trade for him now, and then you got the last year of his deal next year, so they can play that out and see what happens. But it's been reported heavily. It's probably, out of all these deals that we have listed right now, it's probably the most likely to happen just because of all the rumors that we've heard. But we'll see what happens. Jerry Jeudy could be headed to Indy at this year's NFL trade deadline. All right. You've got a little bit of a quarterback suggestion or a mock-up trade that we got that could be happening at this year's NFL trade deadline. There's been a lot of trades talked about around this particular quarterback, and they've kind of fallen off. I mean, we were talking about it before the podcast in the Blitz group chat. The quarterback rumors have started to fall off, especially for this guy. But where do you see the fit for?
Kirk, they can see it, right? It's on the screen already.
Okay, you're right. Okay.
You don't have to do a drum roll.
My fault. I was completely building that up, dude. Oh, man. Okay, for future reference, won't do that. But go ahead and continue about the guy that's on screen.
Yeah, technologically, we have advanced to the point now where we can we have a little bit of a visual aspect of the show. But, yeah, Kirk Cousins to Atlanta. Now, when we first thought of this idea, I was kind of on the we'll send Kirk Cousins to the Jets trade. Like he's got 1 year left on his deal, or the remainder of this year left on his deal. He can go to the Jets for 2 months, maybe save their season, and then go sign with a new team. Now, there's a lot of issues with that I've like, as I think about it more, it doesn't make as much sense. And this trade in general, like there's definitely some holdups here. Kirk Cousins is a family man. He's been in Minnesota for a long time. He's not like like a bachelor, doesn't have kids. He's planted in Minnesota. He can't just like go to New York or to Atlanta for a few months. Now, I think the difference here is I think Atlanta would be willing to make Kirk like their quasi long-term quarterback, not like 6-7 years, but maybe 2, 3, 4 years. Like give him a contract extension at the end of the year, and this is your quarterback for now, because it's being made very evident that Desmond Ridder is not the guy for them. And then also, I think Atlanta has kind of played their way out of, like, they're not going to be in the Caleb Williams, the Drake May conversation. And then you're picking in the middle of the first round. And, even those guys are a little bit of a crapshoot. And then you've got to start this cycle over again with a good roster that they've invested heavily in really for this year. Like, they put a lot of money into this defense this past season. You go get Kirk Cousins, not only I think you become the favorite in this division. I've always thought that they were the favorite in this division. I think Kirk Cousins enhances that. I think Kirk Cousins may even push you into like, is this the fourth best team in the NFC maybe? Can they like start knocking on the door there to get into win a playoff game type situation? I mean, Kirk Cousins,
that's spicy for sure.
Been playing even with the Viking struggles. He's been playing like one of the top 10-ish quarterbacks in the NFL so far this season. The Falcons are at a 500 record with Desmond Ridder playing like one of the worst 2 or 3 quarterbacks that have played this year, at least that were slated to start. Kirk Cousins, such a big upgrade over that. I don't know what you give him contract-wise in this trade, obviously. Ritter's going to go to Minnesota, and I'll talk about that in a second, as well as a 2024 third, which would be a little bit more value than the compensatory pick. I think that would also, you might have to do some convincing with Minnesota, because while I do think that they're headed in the other direction, they do have to think about Justin Jefferson here, and what does this mean of like, okay, we're trading away your franchise quarterback. That needs to be taken into account because he does have a looming contract extension coming up, and he may not want to sign here if there's some uncertainty about the quarterback room. But this team is not going anywhere as it's currently constructed, unfortunately, especially with Justin Jefferson out for potentially another 5 weeks. Not to mention they still have their bye. So you're only going to get, 5-6 games of Justin Jefferson this year? And with the roster that they have, I mean, they just beat the Bears by 6. Like they're sitting at 2-4. I think in a couple months they're going to be regretting that win over Chicago, especially with Chicago having 2 first-round picks. Like if the Vikings want to trade up for a quarterback, Chicago might be the team that controls whether or not they can do that, and they're in the division, and that becomes a big problem. So I think it makes sense to move on from Kirk now. Just kind of go to the bottom and tell JJ, like, look, we'll give you whatever. We'll give you a blank check. You can have input on what quarterback we take, but we have to do this right now to be able to get in a position to get you a long-term quarterback because we don't think Kirk Cousins is the guy. Now, Ridder going to the Vikings, I think, makes a little bit of sense. I thought about this in the same way that I thought about Zach Wilson going here, of like, they need a guy, and like maybe Desmond Ridder figures something out here. I don't think that's going to happen. I liked that idea a little bit more when it was Zach Wilson because, former number 2 pick. He's definitely had some confidence issues, and maybe here in Minnesota without as much the New York media and all that stuff, maybe he figures out. Maybe Desmond Ridder does figure it out here. I don't think he will, personally, but just somebody to throw in the trade. So you don't have to send
the Desmond Ridder. The Desmond Ritter clip of us like
I was
contemplating whether or not he should be sat down is like our most popular one.
Best video this season here has been saying that Ritter needs to be sat down. But then Kirk Cousins in Atlanta, I touched on it a little bit, man. Like, would that not be like a really good? You got Kirk, you've got London, you've got Pitts, you've got Bijan. Like, he's almost going into a very similar situation that he had last year. Now the difference is, the ideology is going to be a little different. Kevin O'Connell, they pass at one of the top 5 highest rates in the league. Now this team not going to be that. And that's why I always thought the fit in Atlanta was weird, but I definitely think that Kirk could make it work. But like Bijan,
I know.
He's got like he's got like a good running game like he had in Minnesota for all those years with Dalvin. He'll have that with Bijan. He'll have a number one wide receiver in Drake London to throw it to. He'll have a number one tight end like he's had with Hawkinson for a while. Maybe we fix Kyle Pitts and start getting him the ball. Dude, imagine if they just flip this thing on its head and they start throwing the ball like 40 to 50 times a game. Like,
as you like Hawkinson, Pitts,
I know it's
Jefferson, London,
Jefferson London
Cook,
is a little bananas,
Okay.
but
Okay.
I even hesitated to let that go out of it. Like I thought about it and I was like, I probably should just gloss over that and not say that out loud. But
No, man. I mean, he's just in his second year. The dude's like what, like 13? Like Drake London's one of the youngest wide receivers in the National
yeah,
Football
I mean,
League.
I
So,
get
like,
it, but Justin Jefferson is like the best receiver.
oh yeah,
So
yeah.
so
There's no doubt.
we'll gloss over that. But the obvious hurdle here is, does Kirk Cousins waive his no trade clause? And that's going to be the problem. Is like, I think it would need to be communicated to Kirk, hey, we are going to pay you X amount of money this offseason. We plan on you being our franchise quarterback for this many years, for him to be like, okay, we're going to drop mid-season. Because you also have to remember, like, the Jets thing doesn't work because he's now got to learn a new playbook in the middle of the season. He's got to walk into a new situation in the middle of the season. That's going to hurt his numbers. If he goes to a new team, he's got an impending contract situation. That could hurt his money if he goes to New York or something like that and takes a long time to get up to speed on that playbook. So I think there would need to be some long-term stability like provided immediately for Kirk Cousins here in Atlanta for that to happen. But I just think this deal makes too much sense for both sides to pass over it. It's just a matter of what Kirk's doing.
Yeah, for sure. It's a matter of what Kirk O'Chains wants to do with the trade deadline because of that no trade clause. I will say, last parting thought on this one. I've talked about this before. If you're watching as a coach, you realize that Desmond Ridder is like, you could go to any other option and that would be better. But there's a reason why Arthur Smith keeps going up to the podium and saying that Desmond Ridder is his starter. Because
He's insane.
I think that's one plausible argument, and that's definitely valid. But I think he wants a run-first quarterback. I think this is a run-first team when it's all said and done. You still got Tyler Algier there. I mean, that's as much as Bijan's great. He is great. I'm not doubting that. But Algier is a nice change. Well, Bijan's really the change of pace back. But anyway, they got a great run game there. Yeah, I know. But they got a great run game in Atlanta. And I think that they want to identify themselves as that with a pretty good offensive line as well. So I think that they probably would, if they can, they would lean more towards like a Kyler. I don't think that's going to happen now with him returning back to practice for Arizona. Maybe that's just a PR stunt, but who knows? But maybe a Justin Fields, like some run-first quarterback maybe. But none of that would happen this year.
Arthur
It would
Smith
be Kirk Cousins.
Arthur Smith did have Ryan Tannehill. Now, Ryan Tannehill is mobile, and they did use his legs a little bit, but he did have Ryan Tannehill for all those years and created a very successful offense with a Ryan Tannehill pocket passer quarterback generally and a really, really good running back, Derrick Henry, Bijan Robinson. Like, they can create that again here. And, I mean, you really start A.J. Brown, Drake London. That's much more of a comparison. A little bit. Just like the jump ball, like bigger-bodied wide receiver type. I need to stop making these like player comparisons, but I definitely think Kirk Cousins in Atlanta. Overall thoughts: I think Kirk Cousins in Atlanta could work, and I think the Vikings need a new direction, and that direction needs to be to the bottom.
Okay, all right, respect, and that would be in result Kirk Cousins heading out of town at this year's NFL trade deadline. So, next trade that I want to talk about is the King. Cowboys go all in on the King, Henry. Derrick Henry, there has been rumors over the past few weeks, and there was heavy speculation before the year started that Derrick Henry was going to be dealt at some point. And as we get closer to the NFL trade deadline, and the Titans are clearly not in a position to win now, it seems like trading a 29-year-old Derrick Henry headed into the last year of, or is he headed into the last year of his contract? I believe it should be the last year of his contract this year. Regardless, yeah, you'll check on that. But he's 29 years old, so you probably want to capitalize on the value that you can get for Derrick Henry now while you still can, and it would make a lot of sense to do it at this year's deadline. It's just a matter of where he ends up. And this is definitely spicy, for sure, and I could see the rebuttal against this, for sure. But I think that Derrick Henry ends up with the Dallas Cowboys at this year's NFL trade deadline. So the Cowboys for the year, they publicly said, came out loud, Mike McCarthy was screaming it from the rooftops. This would be a run first team. And he's right. It has been a run first team so far this year. The usage is there. They are 6th in rush attempts per game. So they are attempting to run the ball, but they're not doing it effectively at all. The efficiency is just not there. They're 21st in yards per attempt. They are 30th in PFF rush grade right now. And the big reason for all that, and I talked a lot about this, if you want to go back and re-listen to the Cowboys episode before the season. Now, I might have been a little hasty with how much hate I placed on the Dallas Cowboys in the offseason. So you might have to glance over a little bit of that episode. But the stuff that I said about Tony Pollard going into this season all applies. Tony Pollard is not a bell cow running back in this league. Like you heard, I haven't heard bell cow back in a little bit, but Dan Campbell said it when he was talking about David Montgomery versus Jahmyr Gibbs. And I think it's pretty much, it should be a similar situation here in Dallas. I think that Pollard is an extremely good football player. He's an extremely good football player, but I think he's a good third down, change of pace, passing back, similar to the Gibbs-Monty situation, or on a lower, like, not the same scale, but similar to like an A.J. Dillon, Aaron Jones situation. Tyler Algier, Bijan Robinson situation, you know? Like you have your change of pace guy, and then you have your between the tackles guy. And Pollard is not your between the tackles guy. So you look at his 2022 stats versus 2023 stats. He had 193 carries in 2022. That was a career high, which doesn't shock many people because he hadn't really gotten his time to shine yet, sitting behind Zeke. I've repeated this 1,000 times, and I'll keep saying it. Zeke out-carried Tony Pollard last year. People do not want to come and face that reality, despite being terrible. And that's all well and good. Zeke was not good last year. He still almost had 1,000 yards, and he did out-carry Tony Pollard by a significant amount, which allowed Tony Pollard to be an efficiency monster. He had 5.2 yards per attempt. That was 3rd among running backs last year. But then you look at 2023. He's already got 96 carries through 6 games. He's on pace for 272 carries. This is not a very small running back, but this is not the type of running back that you want to be giving 272 carries for, as opposed to his 5.2 yards per attempt last year. And I know I'm getting stats worthy, but it is what it is. He's got 3.9 yards per attempt this season. That's 30th amongst all running backs. And he's got a 64.3 run grade in comparison to a 90 run grade last year. So Dallas has been in the market for a second running back. They've been bringing guys in for workouts. I think that they thought Ronald Jones, was going to work out a little bit better. He doesn't end up playing it down for this team. And it's been heavy spec. If you're going to be a run-first team, you need 2 running backs. Rico Dowdle is not going to get the job done. Deuce Vaughn is not going to get the job done as an RB2. They need to establish the run. They've been and my theory that I'm coming to is maybe they've been in the running for Derrick Henry this whole time. Maybe that's the reason that they haven't made a move for a second running back. Maybe they've kept it under wraps that they've been in the running for Derrick Henry ever since he started being shopped before the season, because you need a Zeke replacement. And I think Derrick Henry at 29 in his last year of his deal, I think that would be the perfect Jerry Jones move, and it just makes too much sense for me for the Dallas Cowboys. So can't wait to hear your argument against.
All right, so look, I don't even want to give you the credit of you selling me a little bit, but it does make a little bit of sense. It does make a little bit of sense in the sense of like, okay, they need a player like Derrick Henry. Now the question is, do they want to give up what it costs to get Derrick Henry? Also, you're going to have to do a little bit. I mean, it's not super big of a problem. They're going to need to do some contract flexibility to get him in here because he does have a sizable contract for a running back that they're already also paying a roughly similar contract to Tony Pollard. I know it's just for the rest of the year, but they do have to get him on the team and make the contracts and stuff work about that. The second
if
round
anybody
pick,
can do that, it's the Dallas Cowboys, but continue.
I agree. And a second round pick, I think, is fair value for what Derrick Henry can provide to a team. Maybe you're looking towards a third. It kind of depends on, what you think of Derrick Henry at this point in his career and what 10 or 11 games of him is worth plus the playoffs. That is, a pretty significant question here because I can't see them paying both of those guys long term, especially since Pollard is going to be asking for a contract extension after the season as he was just franchise tagged, and Derrick Henry probably also going to want money in a similar level, and you're going to be paying $20 million to your running back room. That's not exactly a recipe for success in today's NFL. However, getting him on this team would provide a part of their game on offense that they haven't had this year. They just simply haven't. And Tony Pollard cannot provide what Derrick Henry is going to provide. There's not really any running back in the NFL that can provide what Derrick Henry is going to provide. Adding that into the run game not only, helps Pollard be a little bit more efficient the way he was last year. It does kind of keep the ball out of Dak Prescott's hands a little bit more. I know that's the hot button thing is, we can't let Dak throw the ball anymore because he is going to throw picks all the time. Which he has thrown picks in 2 games this year.
He looked a lot better in the Chargers game.
Monday Night Football? Oh my gosh. Yes, he did.
Yeah, he did.
Which is kind of my point here. I know that pains you to say, but it did happen. I don't know.
Despite that, this team is still 6th in rush attempts, dude. So it's like they are running first.
This feels like a Jerry Jones Cowboys. Derrick Henry's really good. Let's go get Derrick Henry. Because I have seen reports that they are going to be buyers. Now, the report was they're going to be buyers for corners because they did lose Trayvon Diggs due to injury. They didn't have the depth to deal with that injury. I think they're going to be looking to grab. I've seen Christian Fulton get floated around. I've seen Byron Murphy get floated around. Obviously, the one that all the Cowboys fans want is Patrick Surtain.
What if they threw like Roger McCreary on top of a Derrick Henry trade?
Dude, no, throw Christian Fulton on there. He plays for the Titans.
That's true. Okay.
So that could happen. I don't know if they'd send both of them in the same trade because they might want to maximize their return by sending them to 2 different teams. But I definitely think this is possible, and I think that this would, where does this move the Cowboys in the NFC? Because that's the question. I
think it moves them into Super Bowl contention.
I know, but who does it move them in front of is the question.
I think... Well, CMC's banged up this week. Debo's banged up this week. I know that's not long term, but with how the Eagles have looked, and especially their recent performance against the Jets, maybe I would put if you're
credit
a run
for the
first
Cowboys.
Team, yeah, I know. I'm getting all crazy here, but if they go out and do this, it shows that they're out to win now, and then Dak can throw it more like 20 times a game than 50 times a game, And that is a recipe for success. So I would love I don't want to say I would love King Henry in a Dallas Cowboys uniform because he's going to wreak havoc in our division, but I think it would be a great fit. Derrick Henry headed to Dallas at this year's deadline. So you've got a very interesting one coming up, and I won't make the same mistake as I did earlier because we have this trade on the screen, and it is a possible Davante Adams, Jameson Williams swap. Davante Adams going to the contending Detroit Lions this year. And Jameson Williams, who the Lions haven't really utilized. I know he just came back off his suspension, but, Dan Campbell's the king of not using first-round draft picks that are offensive weapons and talents. So Jameson Williams could find a home elsewhere. I'll let you elaborate.
Yeah, so this was one that I kind of thought of a few weeks ago when I believe the Raiders were sitting at 1-3. Adams' frustration was really growing. Now they've won 2 games since then, but from what I understand from his press conferences, Adams is still very frustrated here. He's not we're back to 3-3, great. I think he's still a little unhappy here. Now I think this would only the only way I think the Raiders would trade Davante Adams at this year's trade deadline is if he requests a trade, not even requests, demands a trade. And it's I'm going to sit out, really. And
which is very likely.
However, would be quite the development to happen over the next 12 days. And that's the reason why, this one and the next one, which we'll talk about in a second, are going to be a little bit on the more unrealistic side. I think this one, to say that this is, probably going to happen is insane because, the odds of Davante Adams getting dealt probably pretty low to begin with, not to mention Jameson Williams, who hasn't been put into a single bit of trade buzz. However, let's say this does happen. Davante Adams is now a Lion. Dude, we're talking about the Lions. We just put out a video. Go check that out about the Lions being a Super Bowl team now, currently constructed. You add Devontae Adams onto that with Amon-Ra St. Brown, and
Oh my
honestly,
God.
dude, the Lions aren't even losing their deep threat because their deep threat's Josh Reynolds. Like Jameson
Yeah.
Williams was house money at this point with how they've been playing without him. You now can add Devontae Adams in here. I mean, am I crazy to say that they become the favorite in the NFC? Like, is
No,
that
you're not.
because
You're not at
the
all.
way their
And then
defense is
Devontae
playing?
Adams, with all this the attention that he's going to take on the outside, with Amon-Ra coming out of the slot, that's going to open things up so much for him.
And
Oh
Sam
my
Laporta.
gosh.
Sam Laporta's still there, by the
Oh,
way. And guess what? Dave Montgomery been running the ball like a maniac. Once he gets back healthy, they still have that running game going. They can still use Jahmyr Gibbs in the same ways that they probably were planning to use Jameson Williams if they really want to get crazy with it. Maybe not all the way down the field, but like getting him the ball, manufacturing him those touches, using his speed, very well could be a huge asset for them. And Jared Goff, playing like one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, definitely is like an MVP candidate right now. You added Devontae Adams into that offense, man. And the
not
way
to
that the
mention he has
creative
the
ways
chance
they
to
could
play
use
the
him.
Packers again.
Yes,
Like,
and he
he'll
gets
be
the
able to go
Packers.
in the
I mean,
division.
yeah, they've already played him once, so he'll get them again. But that's definitely going to be like he's going to have fun doing that for sure. I think this makes a lot of sense. Now let's do the Jameson Williams to the Raiders. Now the Raiders, it's very like they're 3-3 right now, which is very that's fine and well. I don't think the Raiders are going anywhere this year. I don't think the Raiders are probably going anywhere next year. The defense has been playing better, but I still think it's too far away. The offense is fine, but you don't have your quarterback of the future in here. Like, you just don't. And I think that Devontae Adams... Oh, shut up. I think Devontae Adams is kind of carrying this offense right now to a lot of the offensive production that they've had. If you take him out, you start dwindling off a little bit, and it's just a matter of what direction they want to go into. If they do want to go in that direction, then this is the move because Devontae Adams is 30 years old and is getting paid a lot of money. This also frees up $20 million in cap space here. And you get a guy in Jameson Williams who could be what you were looking for in Henry Ruggs. I know that was a different...
I didn't want to say
I know that was...
I didn't want to say that.
I know, and I know that was a different regime, but they have nobody on this team that can take the top off the defense. Now, if you trade away Devontae Adams, you lose a lot of things, but at least with this, you gain a guy that could be like, this was the number 12 pick in his class. This was a guy that many people had as the top wide receiver in his class. If he becomes that guy, then you're really feeling good about this trade. You also acquire a second round pick in this deal, which is big for a team that's, could be looking to trade up in the draft because they're going to be probably around that like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 range. Like, let's say Chicago's at 1-3. You want to go get Drake May. They can add more ammo to go do that with this deal. I get that it's Devontae Adams, but I just don't think he fits their timeline, and I don't really understand. I mean, we can really go back.
We don't understand why he ended up there in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, like, I was very critical of that, especially when that division started to load up, and you're like, man, if you just traded Derek Carr and got out of this business, they could be competing right now, but they aren't. Whatever. Derek Carr's gone. Devontae Adams isn't happy here. Like, there's a very real world where this offseason this happens anyway.
That's the thing that's the catalyst of this whole thing.
And yeah,
Devontae Adams is actually upset. And I know he came out with something earlier today that was like even more
like saying we strive for greatness. And clearly he doesn't think that the Raiders are that. Like, this guy, especially with the pace that he's on and the fact that he's continuing to put up numbers at his age, could very well go. He's going to be a Hall of Fame wide receiver, man. He does not want to spend the last few years that he's got left of productive football playing with Jimmy Garoppolo. Then maybe, hell, it could be Aiden O'Connell next year. It could be any number of guys that could not be it. And that could be the end of Devontae Adams' career by the time this contract in Vegas is up. He has no playoff success added. He's just added a bunch of counting stats, which are probably not going to be as good as they would be even here in Detroit, where, maybe a year or two from now, he's the wide receiver 2 here to Amon-Ra St. Brown. Who knows? But he's definitely going to be able to support, this team and help himself as well. Not saying that's all he's out to do here, but he's definitely going to be looking out for himself a little bit. Like, he'd much rather go to Detroit where he can win and put up numbers at the same time than just continue to put up numbers here in Vegas. Again, I prefaced it with this, but this probably only happens if Devontae Adams demands, requests, whatever verbiage you want to use, where he asks out of Vegas. Like, I don't think Vegas just like, oh, okay, well, we're going to trade Devontae Adams now.
But I think that's likely.
But I think I think this makes a lot of sense. Like I know, like I asked, like I texted some of my friends and like mentioned it, and they were like, "No, that's insane. Like, why would they do that?" But like, what is Vegas doing? What is their direction right now? I get that they went out and got Jimmy Garoppolo, and they're franchise tagging Josh Jacobs. You have a redo opportunity after you did that. You went all in on Derek Carr. That didn't work out. You have another opportunity to potentially start over here if you just let Josh Jacobs walk. You trade Devontae Adams. Jimmy Garoppolo has void years. You can start him. You can use him as a bridge. You can use him as a backup.
Because you'll be stuck with Devontae Adams in that huge contract. Like he could do great things for you, but you
Like,
can't. It can't be Devontae Adams by himself.
and he's fantastic, but his value only continues to go down as the days go on because his contract number is going up, but so is his age. Like
Yep.
and eventually, like, this guy is fantastic. I didn't think he'd be as productive as he's been this year, but at some point it's going to happen. And at some point he's not going to be the Devontae Adams that we saw in Green Bay, and even the Devontae Adams that we're seeing right now. Like, at some point that's going to happen. You
God
don't
forbid
want to
injuries. Injuries are probably creeping up on him.
you don't want to be holding that bag when that happens, especially when you're as devoid of, I mean, not to say that they're devoid of talent is a little unfair, but they definitely have a lot of work to do before they're like, okay, this is a legit playoff contender. And
Exactly.
if this asset that they could get a guy who, in Jamison Williams, it could be their wide receiver one for the foreseeable future. Granted, there's been little evidence to support that in Detroit, but we know that he's not been being utilized really at all. He had some injuries. He had the suspension. We've seen one game of him this year. He did catch a touchdown, so that's good. Lions need to be selling that. Hey, he caught a touchdown this week. But yeah, I think this trade makes a lot of sense for both sides. Again, the realism of it becomes the question, but I think if this happens, I think a lot of people would be blown away, but I think it's a good trade.
Yeah, I agree. Like I obviously with my next trade, on the spicy side as well. But I mentioned it before the episode. I think that this is going to be. I think this could be very well the most active trade deadline we've ever seen in the history of the league, just because of what's been happening over the past couple years. So I think a trade like this, it would shock me. It would shock everybody. But I think that we will see more trades like this as we go forward into the future. Whether or not it's at this deadline, we'll see. But I think that we're going to see more trades, more superstar trades at the deadline, and it could be Devontae Adams headed to Detroit. So, last one that we got on the docket here is my spicy trade of this trade deadline special, and it is Mr. Mac Jones headed out of New England to get a fresh start in Las Vegas.
Now, talk about superstar trades. Here we go, right here. This is it. This is the big finale,
dude. The dynamo that is Mac Jones could be headed out of town in New England, and I say that in all jest. I do understand the rebuttal against this trade. We were talking about it in the Blitz group chat before the episode, and we were like, you and Mitchell were like, I think other guys in the Patriots are more likely to be dealt, and then you started listing them, and it's like Kyle Duggar, and it's like, I would much rather talk about Mac Jones being traded in depth than a Kyle Duggar, but that's nonetheless the point. Mac Jones to the Raiders could be happening at this year's deadline, and let me tell you why. So, a report came out today from Mike Giardi, something like that, something along those lines. But a trusted reporter, heard his name plenty of times. But he reported that people in the Pats building would rather, quote, have more losses than a win or two that could cost draft positioning. And this comes after a report earlier in the day that Robert Kraft is seriously considering moving on from Bill Belichick when it's all said and done. So you're getting reports out of New England right now that you haven't seen in a very, very long time. I mean, it seems like they are headed towards a full rebuild. And, I mean, have more losses than a win or two sure sounds like tanking to me. So it sounds like the Patriots want to have a high draft pick this coming season, and they could have their eyes set on say, Caleb Williams, or maybe they're not as high in the draft position to draft Caleb Williams. Maybe it's a Drake May. But nonetheless, this team seems like they're in the market for their next franchise quarterback because the guy that they drafted in the first round in 2020 does not seem to be working out in New England. He had an impressive first year. I will say that, and I've been clamoring this for a long time. Like Mac Jones, let's not get too far down the pike on Mac Jones. So, he was a universally first-round pick I mean, that was no question about it in 2020. Like, there's quarterbacks that end up going a little early, sneak into the end of the first round, middle of the first round, just because they're a quarterback. It's the most important position. And then you hear teams say, maybe he doesn't have a first round grade, but it's a quarterback. You get your guy, yada, yada, yada. None of that talk was with Mac Jones. And in his rookie season, he leads a mediocre offense at best. Granted, with a good defense. That defense pretty much is what got them there.
Best defense in the league in that season.
Yeah, okay. Granted, that's why I mentioned it. Very good defense, but he led a mediocre offense to the playoffs while also making a Pro Bowl. I know you are not the biggest fan of Pro Bowls, and that's totally understandable. But to put it into perspective, he finished 2021 11th in PFF pass grade among all qualified quarterbacks. But since 2021, it's not been good. And I totally understand that. But here's the context. In his rookie season, he had Josh McDaniels as his offensive coordinator. Josh McDaniels has won Super Bowls, many Super Bowls with the Patriots as their OC. So he had plenty of experience in New England. You can say whichever you want about Josh McDaniels. He was a great offensive coordinator in New England. That's not up for debate. And Josh McDaniels left Vegas after Mac Jones' rookie season. And then he gets to play with Matt Patricia as his offensive coordinator in 2022, which was arguably the worst offensive coordinator probably maybe in the history of the league. I think that's up for debate. I think that definitely is in the conversation. But nonetheless, it was a terrible situation to step in his sophomore season. So, of course, that doesn't work out very well. And then headed into this year, I know Jacoby Myers isn't exactly a world burner, but he did lose his, by far, wide receiver one in New England, and they just let him walk in free agency. So that's why I think Mac Jones has a shot to end up with Vegas at this year's trade deadline. And the reason is Jimmy G, he's missed some time. He's already missed time in 2 games so far this year. He had an injury to his back this past week where he ended up going to the hospital. So there's some concerns as to the long-term longevity of a Jimmy G at quarterback. And regardless, even if Mac comes in to be the backup here, it's clear that Brian Hoyer is too old to play this position anymore. And Aiden O'Connell, I mean, he's a rookie, so you give him time, but the dude was a 5th-round pick. Like, I'm sorry, Mitchell, you're insane. Like, he was a 5th-round pick, if not a 4th-round pick. So let me put some respect on Aiden O'Connell's name. But Mac Jones was universally a 1st-round pick in the NFL draft. And ever since his rookie season, he's just been set up for failure. So McDaniels loves his pocket passers. I know Brady is a strong example, but he was a pocket passer. You got Jimmy G. Now Mac Jones if they bring him in. And McDaniels likely played a large role in the Patriots drafting Mac in the 1st round because that was kind of shocking. But I think Josh McDaniels, when he was in that position, had some say in that. So I think he's a fan of Mac Jones. And I could see Mac Jones headed to Vegas to pair up with his old OC, to pair up with his old wide receiver one in Jacoby Myers, and have some decent success in Las Vegas. So I can't wait to hear your reaction.
This trade in a vacuum makes sense. I think Mac Jones going to Vegas, getting one more shot before he becomes a career backup, I think makes sense with McDaniels, that all adds up. The issue is, I just don't think that the Patriots, even though they're saying, oh, okay, we don't really care about this year, we're willing to lose some games if it means we're getting better draft position, I don't think that they trade their starting quarterback without a option of like, okay, yeah, Malik Cunningham got some snaps this week, cool. Bailey Zappi had some games last year, cool. This isn't like I talked to you before, it was like Trubisky and Kenny Pickett, where like at the trade deadline last year, everybody was like, oh, well, they can trade Trubisky now that Kenny Pickett's taken over the reins. Like, there is no option to come in here that you're like, okay, well, this is our high upside play for the rest of the year. There isn't one of those. So like this offseason, I think this trade makes a lot of sense, especially if Vegas isn't getting up high enough and New England ends up taking a quarterback, which it seems like they will. This trade makes a lot of sense. I think the package, a 4th for Mac Jones, who was drafted in the 1st round, looked good after year 1, had a really rough year 2, has had a really rough year 3 to this point. I think all of that makes sense. It's just a matter of would they do this in the middle of the season? Like, I don't think anything, even a Jimmy Garoppolo, like, let's say Jimmy Garoppolo, before we put this episode, or even after this episode gets put out, like, he has, like, they get announced that back is season ending. Like, I honestly think the Raiders would just be like, okay, first of all, they trade Devontae Adams, and then they'd be like, okay, well, this season is over. It's fine, whatever. Throw
But it's
Aiden
not like
O'Connell to the
returning
Wolves.
to a playoff contender trading for Mac Jones. That's not.
That's the
That's not
point.
what
That's the
happens.
point, though. I mean, I get it. Like, you're
I
bringing
don't
him
think it
in.
is the point. I
I'm
don't
just
think it
saying.
is the
I'm saying.
point.
I
You're
think
getting
they're
a
gonna.
potential franchise quarterback, which potential. It's a long shot. It's a long shot at this point. I will give you that. But he hasn't had anything to do with, like, he had. What was the quote that he came out with? Doesn't matter how good the chef is,
The
when you're
ingredients.
cooking with,
Yeah,
yeah,
the ingredients are
something
bad or
like
something like
that.
that. Yeah.
The dude has had nothing in his spice cabinet. He's had no vegetable garnishes to throw on his meals, man. There's been none of that. I don't know why I got so deep into the cooking analogy, but it is what it is. I'm just saying. Mac Jones, and also he's entering, like, the Patriots are going to have to make a decision on his fifth-year option this coming year, or this coming off season. So obviously, right now they're not going to pick that up. And
Next offseason.
yeah,
No. You're right. Wait.
it's this coming off season because it's just coming because the 2021 class is up, and Chase Young was part of the 2020, and they just picked or
Yeah,
declined
you're
his
right. You're
player
right. You're right.
option.
You're right. You're right. Yep.
Yeah, so it even makes more sense with the contract situation that he's stepping into, and it's I just think it makes too much sense. And I agree. I totally understand the speculation. If they don't do this in the middle of the season, that's totally understandable. But I think it makes too much sense not to give Mac Jones a chance, and especially as you have it mocked up for a fourth-round pick for a guy that was a first-round talent, like, no doubt, when he was drafted. And in his rookie year, he proved that. He just hasn't had anything to play with since then. So, and we talked about it a little bit before the podcast. What's the difference between the Patriots are planning on moving on from Mac Jones and the Patriots are trading Mac Jones? Like, I agree there hasn't been any trade rumors about Mac Jones, but this team is moving on. And I know that a lot of teams say that, but it's clear that Mac Jones is the guy. So I think that the Patriots would rather go to their backups at this point anyway. I mean, there's been debate that Will Greer is going to start games here soon. So if Mac Jones is really valued that low, then get rid of him in the trade deadline. So, all right, man. Damn, I feel like I argued my heart out for Mac Jones. I did not expect that today. Look at me pulling a little Tyler, a little Mac Jones MVP talk. Once he gets traded to Vegas, he turns into an MVP with Devontae Adams.
I'm probably gonna have to cut you off there. We got to get out of here. Wrap it up. Wrap it up.
the sign.
Yeah.
The sign.
Wrap it up.
Oh my gosh. All right, man. Well, that just about does it for another spicy trade deadline special. These have been fun, man. I love it when we do the trade deadline specials every year. Excuse me. We'll see what happens this year with some of our predictions. Some spicy, some pretty realistic, some that are almost bound to happen. So we'll see what happens. It'll be fun to watch. And like I said, I think this will probably be the biggest trade deadline in the history of the NFL. So keep an eye out. But until then, we'll catch you later. Peace.